Hey, thanks for being here. This is Play It Forward. Real people, real stories, the struggle to play it forward. Episode number 528 is with Allan Kozinn and Adrian Sinclair, authors of the book, The McCartney Legacy, Volume 1, 1969 through 73. That right there was a growing period for Paul McCartney. So many people associated with him, 100% all-out Beatles, but I think he was that little seed that was in the soil about ready to pop as a solo performer.
That's probably true, although, at the time he was so depressed in the aftermath of the Beatles breakup that it took him a while to sort of get cranked up again. But once he did, maybe I'm amazed on the first album is, he's back totally to speed. And, and then what followed over the period we cover sees consistent growth until you get to Band on the Run, which was really a triumph.
Oh, my God. Just those early days. See, the thing is that I'm at the age where I didn't get to experience the Beatles, but I got to experience Paul McCartney. And so when someone told me he was part of the Beatles, I was that kid that it was like, nah, he's Paul McCartney.
That's great.
For you to go in and to do the research that you did in this book in Volume 1, I mean, how do you keep it 100% uniquely your own?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, we were really fortunate whilst making this book that back in 2016, when we were interviewing Denny Sywell, who was a former drummer with Wings, that Denny volunteered to us at the end of an interview his session diaries and also the small diaries that his wife Monique used to keep. And they weren't detailed diaries. They didn't say, fell out with Paul today or anything like that. They were just a log of what was going on in their lives. But what that did give us was a first-hand undisputed timeline for this period. And really that formed the backbone of a lot of the other research that we did. And we put this book together over a period of 8 years. So, wow. That one discovery, that those diaries, comes together with tens of thousands of other things that go into, what people will hold in their hands when they walk into bookstores today.
See, that's one of those things. I truly believe in the dear future reader kind of process of writing, because when you step into those diaries and stuff like that, he wasn't speaking to his moment of now. Dear future reader, he was putting it out there for you guys to find.
He didn't know it at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that I learned about Mark Twain is that when he wrote his autobiography, it was not to be released until 50 years after his death, and he was speaking to the next generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We think we're speaking to, really a long future in which people will be listening to Paul's music and will want to know what went into it. And that's what we were really looking for, how the songs were made, what inspired them, how did he put them together in the studio, what were the other musicians' contributions, what were the engineers' contributions, really everything that we could find about the music of this period. And I think it's fair to say we cover every single song that he did during this period, and that's how we'll continue, we hope, through the rest of the series.
Yeah, I mean, we even put together a little playlist, so you can actually listen along with the book, and I'm guessing that some people maybe won't have heard some of Paul's lesser known songs from this period. So we hope that by the time they've read the book, they'll maybe have some new favorites.
Yeah, because, this time period here is probably one of the last great moments of people listening to full albums. I mean, because, the people, when they got the album, they could break it down, or we would listen to FM radio. They'd drop the needle on that thing at midnight, and we would get the full album. But we never knew the stories until the jock on the air said something about it.
Right. Yeah, I remember those days.
and you depended on radio people to do that. But for a radio guy, the only thing we had was Joel Whitburn. I'm so jealous of this generation that they've got you guys bringing this story forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, and we feel that it paid off because we basically wrote the story. On one hand, I want to say we wrote the story that we wanted to write, but we really didn't have preconceptions. We just wanted to find out everything we could find out. and use that as the basis of the book. And we think it came together really well, and really sort of grateful to the people we interviewed, and Adrian's research was incredible. For background research in the British Library, he sort of sorted through every publication where Paul went someplace and was mentioned. So we've got, little newspapers from Scotland and, things that haven't been looked at for 50 years, and helped us sort of reconstruct a lot of detail.
And I think that really helped us, explore some of the songs that maybe people think they know really well, right. And uncover the stories behind them in greater detail. So there's things like, we've all heard Band on the Run, but I don't think a lot of people will be aware of the fact that was really inspired by a business meeting, of all things, and something that George Harrison said to Paul during a business meeting. So I think anybody who picks up the book will definitely learn something new about songs they know and songs that they don't know.
Well, Band on the Run, you explained it inside the pages that it came with a lot of challenges, and so now when I listen to the song, it's I've got a completely different view of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, talk about going through the mill when they were putting an album together. On the eve of the recording sessions, two members of Wings leave the band. Within a few days of each other. And then they jet off to Lagos in Nigeria to a recording studio that's not even been properly built when they arrive. And then they go through, this whole traumatic experience really over a period of 2-3 weeks in Nigeria, where Paul and Linda are held up at knife point. Paul collapses in the studio one day. I mean, really, they did go through it. But what came out of that period is arguably, Paul's greatest solo record of all time. I think commercially, it's certainly his most successful. Because
he's so positive today, I mean, he's just a ball of energy at all times. Do you think that the average person sees the hits but not the misses? And what this book says, hey, he's a guy. He's a real human being, and he has had some misses in his life.
Right, and there were things that even the band was not crazy about doing, like Mary Had a Little Lamb. But we also try to, give actually both perspectives on that. So Henry McCulloch's frustration at standing there during filming of a promo or a TV special where they're going to do Mary Had a Little Lamb and thinking how much longer is this going to go on. But also Paul's perspective of, he has a daughter named Mary, and this song was something that he put together really for her. And, it has turned up on compilations of children's records, and it has a life of its own that's useful. And we, as sort of, adult, sophisticated consumers of music, may not list it among our favorite Paul McCartney songs, but it has a place.
What was he thinking when he put together Uncle Albert? As growing up through the ranks of radio, I always thought that was his hanging on to the Beatles because of what they did with Sgt. Pepper. But at the same time, I felt like that he was really exploring that new level of storytelling.
Yeah, well, that song came together in various different pieces. So there was a section of it called Gypsy Get Around, which was basically just a little ditty that he played for his kids when they were around his farm in Scotland. And then the two other portions of it, Uncle Albert, was written for an uncle who he had fond memories of from his childhood, an uncle he used to kind of climb on tables during family get-togethers when he'd had one too many, and he remembered him fondly, so he captured him in song. And then the Admiral Halsey side of it came together really during a trip to Scotland during the summer of 1970, where the family took a trip from Campbelltown all the way to the northernmost tip of Scotland, and then they went beyond. They got on a boat and took a trip to the Orkneys and the Shetland Islands, and we think that Uncle Albert, this kind of maritime adventure, was probably based on that, and originally was probably titled For the Skipper that took them across to the Orkney Islands. But in the end, he substituted the skipper's name for a name that he plucked from a film that was out around that time called Tora, 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 which featured Admiral Halsey, played by, I think, James Whitmore. So, he shows this great capacity, and he still has it to this day. I always say he's like a musical magpie. He plucks all of these incredible things from the world around him, and he wraps them all up together, in melody and poetry, and presents them to the world in these incredible songs that we all know.
As that kid, of course, I had the Wings poster all over my bedroom wall and things like that. But as much as Paul McCartney was the superstar, I was also very much attracted to the skills of Denny Laine. Was Denny Paul's brand new John Lennon?
Oh, I don't know about that, because Denny didn't really contribute that much in the way of songwriting. He had, a handful of songs across the entire period of Wings, including one on Band on the Run that was a collaboration with Paul, and a collaboration in the way that Paul sometimes did with John, where they each had part of a song, or Denny had an unfinished song and Paul finished it off. I think it might be saying too much for Denny to say his new John Lennon, but he knew Denny from way back in the Beatles era when Denny was still in the Moody Blues, and they toured second build to the Beatles, and also Brian Epstein managed them briefly. So they knew each other for quite a long time before Denny came to join Wings.
What have you guys learned from this project? I mean, like you said, you invested 8 years of your life into this. I mean, here we go. Now the wilderness belongs to us because you relinquished the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think what we've learned is that 8 years is a very long time. I think during that period, you start off with the skeleton of the book, and then you start fleshing it out. And the more we fleshed it out, the more of the man we began to understand, and how his creative engine works and what makes him tick. So I'd say, over that kind of 8-year period, we really began to understand more of what makes him tick creatively.
I think, as Adrian said, the magpie thing, and that's not insignificant, because everybody in a way is a magpie. They bank their experiences and sometimes do things with them, but not everybody becomes Paul McCartney and writes those songs that he wrote. And that's really a kind of a special quality.
Yeah, I mean, Paul for me, his life is like the ultimate rags to riches story. I mean, this is a guy who grew up in social housing in Liverpool. So he wasn't from a wealthy family, and now he's this incredible superstar. I think it's just such a phenomenal tale. Paul's entire life, really, the Beatles and beyond.
Is it an addiction to creativity? Because Paul didn't mind writing music for other artists as well. I mean, he was always and still is creating music over and over and over, even at today's age.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the most difficult thing with our project, I guess, is that Paul's a man that just doesn't stop. He's 80 years old now and he's still going strong. So, a lot of people ask us, what's your end game, guys? This only covers a 5-year period of his life. How many books are you going to put together? Because, keeping a tally of this incredible creative body of work that Paul's put together as a solo artist is such a phenomenal job. But, it's one we're relishing taking on.
The name of the book is The McCartney Legacy, Volume 1. Hopefully there's going to be several more volumes, because I want to know the Paul McCartney story with his connection with Brian Ray. Because Brian, oh my God, you get him on Paul McCartney, you're going to hear some incredible stories.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we can't wait to get to that part. That will be in, I guess, Volume 4.
I mean, because there's so much that we want to learn. I mean, when Howard Stern gets weak in the knees when he's talking to Paul McCartney, I live for that moment, because he's sitting there in front of Paul. You guys are writing about Paul. I mean, you are so close and so intimate with the story and the actuality.
Yeah, and this is what we wanted. I mean, I've been a Beatles fan all my life, and going back to when they were a current thing. Adrian is a lot younger, and so he sort of grew up with Paul McCartney being Paul McCartney, not an ex-Beatles so much. Although that's, Adrian's a big Beatles guy too. But this is sort of the dream job in a way. I mean, I worked mostly as a classical music critic at the New York Times, but was always covering whatever I could in terms of the Beatles. I left the Times at the end of 2014, which is about when we started, or by then we were already talking about this. And so to, be spending the next period and as far as I can see, the future periods doing this and working in Paul's creative life is a dream.
Can we officially say that the story of Yoko breaking up the Beatles is over with? I mean, because you discuss it in the book, very clear that it's like, okay, let's move ahead of this and let's honor the moments.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. She didn't break up the Beatles, and I think anybody serious about the Beatles knows that. And yet you still run into it. You still run into it all the time. But eventually, I think maybe that will disappear because it's just stupid.
But isn't that what the music industry is all about, though? Those stupid moments.
Sometimes.
So now, when you say that you're critical of classical music and things like that, I've always thought of Paul McCartney as being a Mozart or a Bach or a Beethoven.
I'm not sure I said it was critical of it so much as that I was a classical music reviewer, at the Times. A lot of people say that, and Paul, of course, has a classical side too that will also be in volume 3 or 4. I'm not sure where it'll fall, but he really loves classical music, and he has written 3 large classical pieces, a lot of small classical pieces, and there are classical things he's done that we haven't heard yet. He wrote a guitar concerto. I'd love to hear that. Whether he's Mozart or, it's a different era, it's a different style. But, Paul has, he is an inspired guy. He has that, that touch that comes from who knows where. You can see, like if you watch Amadeus, since you brought up Mozart, and Paul has that, there's in Amadeus, Salieri, the other composer, talks about, Mozart having the touch of God, and, Paul has some of that too. So, it's just a different kind of music. But I think you can make that case, and we're trying to. If
you were to sit down with him and just ask one question, where he wouldn't say, "Oh, I've answered that question several times," what would be that one question that he hasn't answered several times?
Wow, that's a really interesting one.
It's kind of funny because he has a lot of set pieces that he says all the time, about dreaming yesterday and going vegetarian because he's seeing the gambling lambs. And when I interviewed him when I was at the Times, having read even by then, before we started this, pretty much every interview that I could find of him, I was determined to not ask questions that would allow him to do his set pieces.
Yes.
But finding what it would be now, especially having read even more of his interviews, for us, I think because of the depth that we've looked into and having read all those interviews, a lot of the questions that we might ask that he hasn't answered are just sort of technical questions like, how did you do, this guitar line? What did you use? Whatever for the volumes going forward. But even if we weren't to be able to ask him those things, which seems likely because he doesn't like talking to biographers, we've talked to so many other people who were there and can tell us what he did. So there's that. I don't know. Do you have a question you would ask him?
I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
No.
Congratulations on this. Yeah, isn't that the truth? I mean, and that's the thing about it. He's got so many answers for everything. Now, are we going to wait 8 more years for Volume 2?
No.
Okay,
we're
good.
already at work on it. We've got the research largely done, if not completely done, and we're writing it right now. And I think it will be out maybe at the end of 2024.
Well, then I expect to talk to you at the end of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
It's a date.
And we'll talk to you again. Yeah.
Okay, you guys be brilliant today, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much.